Flywoo Firefly Baby Nano 2.0. Flywoo Firefly Baby Nano 2.0. Flywoo Firefly, Flywoo Firefly, Flywoo Firefly. Okay, I can do this. This is the Flywoo Firefly Baby Nano 2.0. And I'm holding the analog video version right now, but you can get it with analog video transmitter, HDZero video transmitter, Cadix Vista video transmitter, or a Walksnail video transmitter. I couldn't decide, so I just bought all four. Whichever one of these video transmitters you bought, the next thing you got to do after you get it out of the box is connect it to your controller, connect it to your goggles, do a little bit of Betaflight setup. No, they're not completely ready to bind and fly. And then you can finally get it in the air and fly it. And that's going to be the topic of this video. We're going to take these from unboxing to initial flight. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. The first thing I do when setting up a brand new quadcopter is bind my controller to the receiver on the quadcopter. The controller is, of course, this thing that I have with the sticks that tells the quad what to do, and the receiver is a little piece of electronics on the quadcopter that receives a signal from the antenna on the controller that then lets us fly the quad. And binding is the process by which this quadcopter knows that it should be listening to the stick movements of this controller. It's how you can fly with more than one person and everybody's flying at the same time, but there's never any confusion about who's controlling whose quadcopter. And one of the concessions that we have to make in this video, just to sort of reality, is that the Firefly Nano Baby can be ordered with several different receivers. You can order it in a PNP, which stands for plug and play, which means it doesn't come with any receiver and you would install your own receiver on it. It can be ordered with a FreeSky XM receiver, an ExpressLRS receiver, or a TBS Crossfire Nano RX receiver. All four of the quadcopters that I purchased for this video were purchased with the ExpressLRS receiver. I think it's the one that's the best, especially for very, very small quadcopters like this. ExpressLRS is a very high performance, very long range controlling, which means you can fly great distances without losing link and fail-safing. It is built into the flight controller, which means that you don't have a separate piece of electronics to tape or zip tie to the board. It just has a lot going for it. If you want to know more about ExpressLRS, I'll have a link to my full ExpressLRS Getting Started guide down in the video description below, along with many, many other reference videos that I'll be referring to throughout this video. But for the time being, we're going to be doing an ExpressLRS setup. And if you have a different kind of receiver, well, a lot of the other parts of this video will apply, but maybe not this exact part. The radio that I'm going to be using for this video is the Radiomaster TX16S. The TX16S is one of, if not the most popular radio in FPV today, in my humble opinion. And this is the JB, the Bardwell edition of the TX16S. And one of the things that makes that stand out is that it has ExpressLRS built in. If your radio does not have ExpressLRS built in, you could get an external module like this one here that plugs into the back of the radio, but you will need an ExpressLRS module in order to bind to these ExpressLRS receivers. Older radios that only have, for example, FreeSky modules in them would not be able to do this without an external module. If you are not using this exact radio, the good news is that the steps I'm about to show you will be basically the same. Check this out. This is a Radiomaster Zorro, and it looks very, very different from the TX16S that I use as my daily driver. But in much the same way that you could have a Windows or a Mac OS laptop, and you could have a Windows or a Mac OS desktop, they all run Windows, they all run Mac OS. You could have an Android phone, and the phone may look different, but they all run Android underneath. And if you're familiar with how Android or Mac OS or Windows works, then when you move from one computer to another, you pretty much can find out where everything is. The interface may look a little different, but the basic functionality is the same. And that's true for these radios. These radios run an operating system called EdgeTX, and although the interface looks a little different, a lot of the stuff is identical. The way that binding works in ExpressLRS is a little bit different from the way that it works in more traditional RC protocols. In traditional RC protocols, there would be a bind button on the receiver and a bind button or menu option on the controller. You would press the bind button on one and the bind button on the other, and they would bind. And ExpressLRS does have that functionality at least a little bit, but it's not the main way that it's intended to work. In ExpressLRS, the module and the receiver are configured through this program which runs on your Windows or Mac OS computer. ExpressLRS Configurator is used to set your configuration options. You then flash the firmware to the receiver and to the module, and that contains a parameter known as the binding phrase. And when you have a receiver and a controller with the same binding phrase, they are bound. It makes it really easy to bind a new, you could just flash a new receiver with your binding phrase, and you know that when you later turn your radio on, they will be bound and ready to go. Now, we're not going to do a full how-to ExpressLRS tutorial here. Rather, I'm going to refer you to my ExpressLRS Definitive Getting Started Guide if you have absolutely zero experience with ExpressLRS and you want to know the basics. But essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to flash this receiver with ExpressLRS. The module is already flashed with ExpressLRS. If you have a brand new module that you've never flashed before, you would flash it, and then they would be bound. The only thing you need to know is a few specific options that are unique to this quadcopter. At the time I'm making this video, the latest version of ExpressLRS is 3.01, and that's what I'm going to be flashing. You should probably flash whatever the latest is at the time that you're watching this. The device category, we can start to type Flywoo, and we can find Flywoo 2.4 gigahertz, and then the device that we need to select is Flywoo EL24P 2400RX. EL24P is in Paul, not E as in Edward. That is the correct one. Now, when you do that, you're going to see a warning here saying that the manufacturer of this hardware has not provided samples to the developers. Contact them for support or proceed at your own risk. Not all features may work. The way that ExpressLRS works is it is completely open source. It is developed for free by enthusiasts in their spare time because they're masochists, I assume. And the way that it usually works is that a manufacturer who wants to release hardware based on the ExpressLRS software will submit hardware to the developers for them to sort of look at and see if there are any problems with it. Flywoo has not done that. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong here. It just means that there might be something wrong and the devs don't want to be held responsible for that. Despite this dire warning, if you do need help with your ExpressLRS install, well, first of all, you're welcome to email me. jb@joshuabardwell.com is my email address, and I answer between, I'd say 50 to 200 emails a day from people just like you who have a question or a problem that they're trying to solve. In addition, you can go to the ExpressLRS Discord server, which is just a chat server where devs and other helpful people hang out. And even though it says contact Flywoo for support, they'll probably help you if you head on over there. I'll definitely help you. Once you've selected the device category and the device, the remaining options here will be set up the same as I show in my ExpressLRS Definitive Getting Started Guide. So I'm going to refer you to that for the rest of that process. The key thing that you're going to need is that when you plug in the quadcopter, power up your radio, you should see a RSSI or signal strength indicator here on your screen somewhere. And if you run the ExpressLRS Lua script, what's a Lua script? Watch the Definitive Starting Guide. You should see a C in the upper right-hand corner indicating that you are connected to your quadcopter, and now they are bound. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to plug the quadcopter into the computer and set up Betaflight. And it comes mostly set up, but there are a few little things that you'll need to do to tweak it to be just right for your controller. If you've never downloaded and installed Betaflight Configurator before, I'm going to refer you to this video, Betaflight 4.3 Install Flash Setup Tab, Complete Walkthrough Part 1, and there are links to that. There's a link to that down in the video description below if you want to find that. So I'm going to fire up Betaflight Configurator, and I'm going to connect to it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to the receiver tab, and I'm just going to wiggle the sticks on my controller, and I want to see that I have movement as I move the sticks, and I do. That's fantastic. Next, I'm going to check that my channel mapping is correct. So I'm going to move the throttle up and down wherever your throttle stick is. And you can see here that the throttle channel is moving up and down. I'm going to move the yaw left and right. and see that it is moving correctly. I'm going to move the pitch axis up and down, and the pitch channel is moving, and I'm going to move the roll left and right, and the roll channel is moving. So in my case, my channel mapping is correct. If your channel mapping is not correct, what you're going to want to do is go over here to the channel map parameter, and you're going to rearrange the AETR parameters to rearrange the order. For example, if your roll and your pitch channel are flipped with each other, then you would swap the A with the E in this AETR. So you roll and pitch, A and E. It stands for aileron, elevator, rudder, the control surfaces of an airplane, even though this quadcopter doesn't have any control surfaces, but be that as it may. So I could change those. I could type EATR. I could type RETA. I could type whatever I want and hit enter, and that would change the order of the controls if it was not correct. The next thing I want you to do is check your endpoints, and we're going to do that by moving the sticks all the way down and all the way up, all the way to the left and all the way to the right. And in my case, you can see that when I do that, the sticks go from 1,000 to 2,000, 1,000 to 2,000, and that's going to be true for all of my channels. That may not be true for your channels. If your sticks don't go from 1,000 to 2,000, if there's like 1995 or 1990 or 2011 or something else, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to calibrate your gimbals on your radio. If you're not sure how to do that, I've got a tutorial about that. You're calibrating your gimbals wrong, that shows you the right way to calibrate your gimbals. There's a link to that in the video description below. If after calibrating your endpoints still aren't correct, the next thing to do is to press the model key on the radio and page to the outputs screen on the radio. And the output screen is where you're going to adjust the lower and upper endpoint of the channel as well as the center of the channel. So I can just pick any channel. I can scroll up and down. I'll pick channel 1, for example, and I'll click edit. And then while editing channel 1, I can adjust the min, the max, and the subtrim. The min is going to be the lower endpoint when the stick is all the way down. The max is going to be the upper endpoint when the stick is all the way up. And the subtrim is going to be the center when the stick is at the center. So if, for example, if I adjust the min here, if I scroll this, which channel am I adjusting? There we go. I'm adjusting the roll channel apparently. So as I adjust the min down, the roll channel goes down. And if I adjust the min channel up, the lower end position of the roll channel goes up. And I'm going to adjust that until it hits 1,000 here, 1,000 here in the receiver tab. For the max, I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to adjust it until I hit 2,000, and then I'm going to center the stick, and I'm going to adjust the subtrim until I hit 1,500. Now, the good news is that once you've done this, it will probably be fine for all future receivers that you bind to this same radio. So this is a one-time setup that you may, and that's why I didn't have to do it. That's why mine were just correct. But I wanted to include it in case you run into this problem. There's a couple other changes I want you to make here in the receiver tab. First of all, I want you to enable telemetry. Telemetry is a feature of ExpressLRS. Long story short, you want it. I don't know why they have it turned off. Turn it on. It should have been on from the factory. What's going on, Flywoo? What are you doing? Also, I want you to disable the RSSI ADC feature. This shouldn't be on for this type of receiver, and I don't know what Flywoo is doing. Turn that off. I want you to adjust your stick low threshold from a value of 1050 to a value of 1010, and your stick high threshold from a value of 1900 to 1990. These parameters are set the way that they are because they are assuming that you didn't calibrate your gimbals and adjust your endpoints correctly. Since you calibrated your gimbals and adjusted your endpoints correctly, you can get just a little bit more stick resolution by adjusting these as I show you here. And everything else in this is going to stay as it is. We're going to hit save and reboot. Next, we're going to click over to the Modes tab, and here we're going to set up the Aux Modes for this quadcopter. What are Aux Modes? Well, in order to arm the quadcopter, you're going to flip a switch, and then it's going to arm the motors, and you're going to take off and fly. When you're done flying, you're going to flip a switch, and it's going to turn the motors off, and you're going to not fly. You could have a switch that you pull that makes the quadcopter beep so you can find it after you crash. You could have a switch that switches you from auto level mode to acro mode. There's a whole bunch of Aux Modes that Betaflight supports. In fact, here are all of them. I don't recommend that you just read them all, but if you are the kind of person who wants to do that, I have a complete walkthrough of the Modes tab. Don't go watch it. It's long and tedious, and if you enjoy it, you might also want to be an ExpressLRS dev because you're clearly a masochist. But we're going to set up the basic aux modes that we need in order to fly. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete horizon mode. Flywoo, don't ship your quads with horizon mode as the default. That's a terrible, I heartily disagree with that. Horizon mode is a good thing. It should just be removed. It encourages bad habits and doesn't teach people to be good pilots. We're going to delete horizon mode, and you're going to do it too, right? And then I'm going to go down here and hit the save button to get rid of horizon mode forever. And you're going to do that too, right? Okay. Now we're going to set up the arming mode. Arming is how you tell the quadcopter you want it to spin the motors and you're about to fly, and disarming is how you stop the motors when you're done flying or after you crash. And the first thing we have to do is we have to think about which of these switches we want to use to turn the quadcopter on and off, to arm and disarm it. And I like to use this back left 2-position switch. It's a 2-position switch, arm, disarm, 2 positions. So it seems to make sense to me. It's also easily accessible from my finger here. So that's what we're going to do. The next thing I'm going to do is press the model key, and I'm going to page to the mixer screen. And you can see here I've already got my aux mode set up. Again, this is one of those things you only do the first time you set up the model. But what I'll do is I'll go ahead and delete channel 5, and I'll set it up again for this demonstration. So I'm going to scroll down to channel 5, and I'm going to click the jog wheel 1 time and click edit. Then I'm going to scroll down to source and click the jog wheel 1 time. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this switch. I'm just going to move the switch, and that will cause the radio to auto detect that that switch is what I want to be controlling this mix. I'm going to hit the jog wheel 1 time, and that's it. I'm going to hit the return key to back out. And now you can see that if I go to the Betaflight receiver tab, you can see that when I move that switch, aux1 moves, right? That switch is now controlling aux1. That's what we've done by setting up that mixer line. We've said that that switch controls the position of channel aux1. So then we're going to go to the modes tab, and we need to link that switch or that channel to the arming mode. And we're going to do that by setting this to auto and then flip the switch. And it will automatically pick up aux1 as the switch that we moved. If not, you can manually set aux1 here just by using this pull down. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to move the switch. And notice that as I move the switch, this little yellow tick mark moves back and forth, showing us the current channel position or switch position. So for ExpressLRS, the ARM mode needs to be set up on aux1. It's mandatory that it be on aux1, and it is mandatory that it be high, aux1 at 2000. That's the only requirement ExpressLRS has about your aux modes, but it is a non-negotiable one. So the way that we're going to do that is we've got this yellow segment here, and whenever the channel is within that yellow segment, the mode will become active. So we want to drag that over. Well, it already was by default, but we're going to drag that over here so it covers the top of the channel, and we're going to hit save. And that means that when the switch is pushed away from us, we'll be disarmed, and when the switch is pulled towards us, we'll be armed, and that's how we will arm and disarm the quadcopter. Now there are a couple other aux modes that I like to set up, and I'm going to talk you through them briefly. We're going to set them up in the mixer screen by highlighting the channel, channel 6, click once to edit the new mix, go down to source, click once, and then pick which switch, move the switch, and that will automatically select that switch as the source for that mix. And the way I've got it set up is I've got switch SD set up on channel 6 and SH set up on channel 7. SD is this front 3-position here, and SH is the 2-position momentary here on the right shoulder. I'm going to hit add range for angle mode, and I'm going to have angle mode be active when the switch is centered, so just leave it like that. I'm going to go down to beeper and hit add range, and I'm going to pull the momentary switch, and I'm going to have the beeper activate when I pull the momentary switch. So as I pull the switch, notice this tick mark moves over here. So I'm going to put this yellow region on top of that. I'm looking for flip crash, add range for that, and I'm going to put this right hand switch all the way down for flip crash or turtle mode and drag this over to cover that. and save. And then I'm going to scroll to the top and hide unused modes, leaving me just what I've set up here. So I push all the switches away. This is my default position. I flip the left-hand switch to arm and disarm the quad. If I want to fly an auto level mode, I put this right-hand switch in the center position. If I want to fly an acro mode, I push it away. And for the beeper, I pull this right-hand one here to make the quad beep if I've crashed. And finally, if you need to flip the quad over after crashing, you can use flip crash mode. If you're just getting started, don't worry about flip crash mode yet, but you'll have access to it when you're ready for it. I'll hit save and our modes are set up. Next, I want you to go to the configuration tab, and there's a few little quality of life improvements I want you to make here. First of all, I want you to change the maximum arm angle from 25 degrees to 180 degrees. The purpose of the maximum arm angle is that if the quadcopter is not flat and level, it will not arm and it will not take off. The idea is that if you had the quad like in your hand, you wouldn't be able to arm it because it would be tilted over. But this is kind of silly because it means like if your quad is sitting on a rock or if it's tilted slightly, it won't take off. Or if it's on a hill, it won't take off. And by setting the max arm angle to 180, you disable that. I do this on all my quads. You might not want to do it on larger quads, but especially on these little guys, the risk of accidentally arming it when you didn't intend to is not that extreme. So I'll disable that. I also want you to enable this beacon, D-shot beacon configuration. That's a complicated way of saying that the motors can be used to make a beeping sound. There isn't any actual beeper on this quad. Is there a beeper on this quad? Surely not. I don't think there is. So we're going to enable D-shot beacon configuration. We're going to enable these two, and that means that we can hear the quad beeping if we crash and lose it somewhere and don't know where it is. Next, we're going to set up the video systems for each of these quadcopters. And this is going to be one part of the video where of course, I'd love if you watch the whole thing. It's great for my analytics, but you're probably going to want to watch just the section of the video that is for the type of video system that you bought. I'm going to do all four, and there are chapter markers down in the timeline below, as well as a table of contents down in the video description, and you can skip to the one that is most relevant to you. And we're going to start with the analog one, and these are my analog goggles. These are Orca FPV goggles with a rapid fire receiver module in them. And the first thing I'm going to do is plug in the quadcopter. You got to plug it in to power up the video transmitter. And I only see static in my goggles. I don't see any signal. So the way analog works is the quadcopter broadcasts on a certain frequency, and the goggles tune into the frequency, and that's basically all there is to it. In order to figure out what frequency this quadcopter is on, we can go to the video transmitter tab here in Betaflight, and it has been shipped on E-band. Channel 8. Why? That makes no sense. Let's change this. Let's go to the video transmitter tab. I want you to change it to race band. Pick a channel. I suggest you pick channel 8. I'll tell you why in a second. And for power, let's just set the power to 25 milliwatts, which will help prevent the video transmitter from overheating while we are working on it. And I will just hit the save button in the lower right. And here in my module, I'm going to use the joystick to switch to race band. We can see R there is race band, and I'm going to go to channel 8. There we go, channel 8. And now if I look inside the goggles, I still don't have video. I have some smeary garbage. Okay. What's going on here? We're not on race band 8. It's not on the right channel. I can tell that it's not. Why is it on E8? I told it to go to race 8. This is stupid. Save, you son of a... What if we try race band 7? Is it locked? No, it's just not working. The flight controller is correctly reflecting that we are requesting that it go to different channels, but the video transmitter is not changing channels. It is staying on channel E8, which is what it shipped on. This is dumb. Let's try power cycling. You never know. Oh, now it's gone. Now it's not on E8. Let's see if it's changed channels. We'll go over to R for race band and go down to 7. Yep, now it's moved. What the F? Okay, just took it a second. Fair enough. The reason I say that you should use raceband 8 is that the lower raceband channels, all of the lower FPV channels, overlap with Wi-Fi. So if you have Wi-Fi access points nearby, they could give you interference. If you do use raceband 8, if that is available to you, then it avoids Wi-Fi interference. And, you know, you can fly on the other channels too, but I always default to race 8. As far as power goes, I suggest you default to the max power possible, unless you're flying in a race where they require you to turn the power down. Or if you're working on the bench like I am, you can turn it down to keep the video transmitter from overheating. That is how you set up your analog video transmitter. Now, you may not have a rapid fire module and you may not have these exact goggles. The exact way to change channel band will depend on your goggles, but suffice it to say, you will have a control that lets you select the band. I suggest that you just use race band for the sake of simplicity. These other bands are pretty much historical and are seldom used these days. And then a channel, 1 through 8, and you will put your video transmitter on the same channel as you put your goggles on. And if you're not sure which one, your goggles may have a search function, or you can just go into Betaflight and you can look and you can see what channel it is supposed to be on. And hopefully that'll work. That's it. Next, we're going to do HDZero, and in many ways it's going to be similar to analog because HDZero and analog both use a broadcast technology. The video transmitter on the quad sends the signal out into the air, and you simply tune into the right frequency or channel to pick it up. But there are a few little quirks, and of course, I'm going to show you what they are. Let's go ahead and plug our quadcopter in. And before it plugs in, we can see that the HDZero goggle is scanning, waiting to see what channel the video transmitter comes up on. We'll plug her in. And I think I ought to get a fan because this video transmitter overheats too. Let's see if it overheats, and if it does, we'll get a fan and we'll take care of that. Oh, it's overheated. No, there you go. I knew it was going to overheat. Let's get a fan and keep it from overheating. This won't happen when you fly the quad because the quad moving through the air will create enough airflow to keep the video transmitter cool. But if you power it up on the bench like I'm doing here, you will need something to keep it cool. Well, the image is purple. I'll have to look into why that is. Yes, indeed. I wonder why the image looks purple. Could it be that I have a giant purple light casting a wash on my back wall? There's nothing wrong with the camera. Let's update the firmware. As you might have expected, I have a SharkBite HDZero complete setup and configuration guide. If you need to know how to update firmware on your SharkBite video transmitter or your SharkBite module, there are instructions there. While that firmware is updating, I do want to point something out to you. Since the last time I updated firmware, it looks like they've added a whole bunch of new HDZero devices. One of the things that I had to pay attention to was, this is the VRX, that's the module or the goggles, and there are 2 of them now, depending on if you have the kind with 2 antenna connectors on top or 4 antenna connectors. Make sure you select the right firmware. And then also for the video transmitter, I believe this must be the Whoop Light Race, but I'll check that. Hold on. Yeah, okay, so it is the Whoop 200 milliwatt VTX, and where it means we're going to use Whoop TX 5.1, not the Whoop Lite. That's the 1S video transmitter. So this is the firmware we're going to use for the video transmitter. And I'm just going to update them both to the same version just to be 100% sure we're on the latest. It's a good idea. That's something you certainly don't have to do with analog video transmitters. For this HDZero video transmitter, the way that you're going to change the power and the channel and the other settings is inside your goggles. So right now we're recording the goggle feed. And you can see that if I move the sticks on my controller down and to the inside, then it brings up this menu. This is the video transmitter menu for the HDZero video transmitter. Here we can change the channel, and we do that by moving the right stick to the right or left. And we can change the power. We do that by, again, moving up and down to change which option we're modifying, and so on. When we're done, we will hit save and exit, and any changes that we've made will take effect. As far as channel goes, there is no best channel. As I said in the analog section, race 8 is my default because it avoids Wi-Fi interference, but if you're flying with other pilots, only one can fly on a channel at a time, so you may need to be on a different channel. Now let's do the Walksnail ones, and unlike the HDZero and the analog system, Walksnail is not broadcast based. You have to bind the video transmitter and the goggles together, and then they will communicate digitally. So that's what we're going to do. And we will do that by powering up both the goggles and the video transmitter. On the goggles, there is a bind button right here. I'm going to push it with a paper clip. And on the video transmitter, there is a bind button. Where's it at? It is right here next to this blinking green LED. I'm going to push that. And there we go. We have bind. We don't have an image from the camera. That's interesting. But we do. Firmware. There we go. Now we got it. Firmware versions don't match. So we have to update the firmware on the video transmitter. And if I use the joystick on the goggles to go over to check, I can see the firmware versions on the two. We're overheating. Oh, I can see we're overheating. Let's put a fan on this one too. Keep it cool. If you've never updated the firmware on your Walksnail system, I show you how to do it in this video, which is linked down in the video description below. 1200 milliwatt hack for Fat Shark Dominator Walksnail Avatar FPV goggle. By the way, you will also want to do that 1200 milliwatt hack. Actually, that doesn't matter for this video transmitter because it only goes up to 350 milliwatts. But you do want to update the firmware, and you can get that firmware from this page on Caddx's website. I'll put a link in the video description below, of course, and it is going to be here, Avatar 2832.10, at least at the time of this this release. That's the latest, and you will want to use the Avatar Mini firmware for your VTX, and of course the Avatar Ground firmware for your goggles. I got a weird situation here. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm going to show it to you, and then I'll tell you what the answer is if I find it. I'm going to just use this joystick here to bring up the goggle menu, and we can see in the goggle menu we have the ability to change channels and to change certain settings, including the transmit power, and you're going to want that to be as high as it can be. Now notice that I said earlier this video transmitter goes up to 350 milliwatts, but you'll see here in the menu it seems to go even higher than that. That is a misnomer. That will be fixed in a future firmware update. Basically the way it works is 500 and up are all 350. You're not going to get any more than that. You also have the option to change the resolution, the frame rate, the bit rate, and so on. I'm going to tell you that my standard way of flying this guy will be 500 milliwatts, high frame rate, except I'm not going to change it to high frame rate because that will mess up my recording of the screen. But high frame rate, resolution 720p. Shall we risk messing up the recording? Here we go. And high bit rate. On the other hand, if you are flying with other people, then you would want to use low bit rate. And actually, let me give you a reference about that. This video, DJI and analog can fly together, stop FPV interference. I've linked it down in the video description below, and it is mandatory watching for anybody who goes in flying FPV, but especially Walksnail and DJI pilots who have more potential to interfere with other people and make problems for them. And it's a case where you might be being rude and don't even know you're doing it. I strongly recommend you watch that to learn more about how to set up your system when flying with other people. If you're flying by yourself, max power, high bit rate, all the good stuff. But if you fly with other people, there are some courteous things you need to do. The other thing I want to show you is this video, how to get the best performance from FatShark/Walksnail, which goes into more detail about these settings and why I set them the way that I do and not some other. For example, why don't I use 1080p? Why do I use 720p? Well, watch that video and you'll learn more. Next, we come to the DJI system, and as with the other systems, except analog, one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to update the firmware just to make sure that everything is on the latest. But the DJI system has a gotcha that is unique. This video on my channel, linked in the video description below, have you gotten tired of hearing me say that yet? This video goes into what it means to root your DJI goggles and install WTF OS. And the short version of it is that the ability to do that adds some very, very desirable features that DJI didn't put into the goggles. There are some risks to doing this, but a lot of people feel that this is a must-have feature for these DJI goggles. And the problem is that if you update your firmware to a certain version, then you can't do it ever on those goggles. So if that sounds even like vaguely up your alley, then you should pause this video and you should go watch this video, and you should think about whether you want to do that on your goggles, and you should look at the firmware version that's on your goggles and compare it to what I say in that video, and maybe even you want to go ahead and root your goggles before you do any more firmware updating. But that's all we're going to say about that at this time. As with the Walksnail system, the DJI system requires that we bind the goggles and the video transmitter together. So we'll power the goggles on and we'll power up the video transmitter, and I'll show you how to do that. Here on the goggles, we're going to press the bind button with a paper clip, and here on the quad, the bind button is right here next to the USB port and the blinking green light. Okay, DJI goggles don't have easy HDMI out, so instead we'll put a GoPro in the lens so you can sort of see what's going on here. On the DJI goggles, you access the menus using this joystick here, and if I click that, we can check out some of these settings. We pick which channel we want to be on from the player menu. I've got 3 channels visible here because I'm in 50 megabit per second high bitrate mode. If you were in 25 megabit per second low bitrate mode, you would have 8 channels. Basically, 50 meg gives you better looking video, but if you're flying with a lot of other people, you have to use 25, so you have enough channels for everybody to fly. And output power is down here under settings. By default, the unit goes up to 700 milliwatts, but there is a 1200 milliwatt hack that can be done. I highly recommend it, and I've got a video about it, which I'll link down below. By the way, you might think, oh, is this going to overheat? All the other guys are at 200 milliwatts, 350 milliwatts. We're going to run this Vista at 700 or even 1200 milliwatts. Yep. And on the bench, it will overheat, but as long as you're flying with airflow, at least in my experience, it holds up pretty well. And it's a lot more power than the other 2 systems, although there's other pros and cons. We're almost ready to take this quadcopter outside and fly it, but there's just one more thing we need to do before we get to that, and that is fix this OSD, this on-screen display. It's a mess, and I'm going to show you how to make it much, much better. But before we do that, I want to take 1 second to let you know, this is my full-time job, and I give away all my content for free to everybody who wants to watch it. I don't put it behind a paywall, and I do that because I want to help you get over this ridiculous learning curve of FPV and actually have a good time and enjoy it. And I hope that one day you will decide that you want to give something back. And if today's that day, the best way for you to support me is via Patreon. Patreon is a website where you can subscribe to me for as little as $2 a month, or more if you feel like I've earned it. The amount that you subscribe at is totally up to you, and you can stop whenever you want. Patrons get access to my Discord server where you can chat with other friendly, helpful people in the FPV community, and they get access to podcast downloads of all my live streams if you want to listen to them in the car or while you're jogging or walking around instead of watching the live stream on YouTube. But mostly, patrons get the good feeling of giving back. And if today's the day that you want to have that feeling, then there's a link down in the video description below to my Patreon. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. If that day hasn't come yet, then I'm going to keep making this content, and I hope you'll keep watching it, and maybe it'll come at some other time. The good news about setting up the on-screen display is that the process for setting it up is going to be the same regardless of which of these different variants you have, except for the DJI one where I'm going to have a special note. But let me make a case to you first about why the on-screen display is so important. Like, do you like killing your batteries and then having to buy new batteries? No. Do you like having your battery die in mid-flight so your quadcopter falls out of the air and maybe you lose it? No. The most basic thing you can do in the on-screen display is monitor your battery voltage. There's a whole lot of other information the on-screen display can give you, but it'd be like driving a car with your gas gauge not working. Okay, so I know some people do that, but you have to have an on-screen display, and all of these quads support on-screen display. But the on-screen display given to you by Flywoo, first of all, it's the same OSD for all of these quads, and that doesn't work. And second of all, it's just a complete mess of nonsense filling up the screen, and I'm going to show you a very simple way to customize it and get it looking its best. And instead of setting it up manually in the on-screen display tab, we're going to go to the Presets tab. And what I want you to do is I want you to hit Preset Sources, and I want you to hit Add New Source. And that's going to give you a dialog box like this where you can put a name and a URL. And I've already created this preset source. You're going to put the name. You can put whatever you want. I put JB Private Repo. This is my private repo. It's not private though. You can get it too. We're going to put this URL. I'll put this URL down in the video description if you want to copy paste it, or you can just type it as you see there. And we're going to put this Github branch, JB-presets. And once you've done that, you're going to hit Make Active, and you're going to make the JB private repo active. And if later you want to go back to the Betaflight official presets, you can just make that one active. But I want you to make the JB private repo active. And when you've done that, you'll have access to all of my presets, including my OSD preset, which is going to let you easily set up your OSD on all of these quadcopters with just a click of a button. Here it is, JB OSD presets. You're going to click on that one. And then you're going to go to this list of options and you're going to pick which of these systems you have. Now, if you have the HDZero or the Walksnail quadcopter, you'll pick HDZero and Walksnail. For the analog quadcopter, you're going to select PAL, parentheses, analog. And for the DJI quadcopter, this is where we have to have a special note. So the DJI video transmitter supports a very limited set of on-screen display options. It can display only some of the things that Betaflight can show you, not all of them. And that's okay. It's more than enough. In fact, for years, it was all we had. And if you are okay with that, then you will select DJI Standard and your OSD will be good to go. However, if you want access to the full Betaflight OSD, then you will need to root your Vista. You will need to install WTF-OS, and then you can select DJI WTF-OS instead of DJI Standard. If that sounds like a lot for you and you just got this quadcopter and you just want to fly it, select DJI Standard. If you feel brave and industrious, or if this is not your first time, go watch the video I linked earlier down in the video description about WTF-OS and rooting, and that's what I'm going to be doing. This is much, much better. By the way, you don't need to select any of these UARTs. You don't need to do that. Leave these unchecked. Select one of these options, depending on which type of video system you have. And then when you're done, click Pick. So I'll select NTSC because this is the analog quad. I'll hit Pick, and then I'll hit Save and Reboot. And here in the OSD, we now have, there's one more thing you're going to do. You're going to put your craft name in. So my craft name, we'll go to configuration and we'll type just put JB as my craft name. That just puts my call sign in the OSD. And then if your name is more than 2 letters, you may need to sort of drag this over a little bit so it doesn't, or you could just take it off. You could just turn it off by disabling craft name right over here. If you want to set your OSD up yourself and not just copy my preset, I've got a video that goes through every single thing that you see here. It's frankly way too much information. But if you're the kind of masochist who likes way too much information and you just want to know it all, there's a link down in the video description to that video and you can check it out, as well as just basically seeing how to set this up. And now the only thing that's left to do is for you to take it outside and fly it. But before you do that, you will need to charge up a battery. And I'm going to give you a reference here on screen, a card to a video about safe LiPo battery charging and maintenance. These things can start fires if you don't know what you're doing. You definitely need to familiarize yourself with those procedures. I'm also going to give you a video here about how I test a quadcopter before I maiden flight it the very first time. On these little guys, the risk is relatively low, but still, it's a good habit to get into. I'll see you there. Welcome to the world of FPV if this is your first squad, and happy flying.